I was standing in my bedroom with one sock on and one sock in my hand when my phone buzzed. The suitcase was already open on the bed, passport on the nightstand, boarding pass printed and tucked neatly inside the side pocket, like I'd done 100 times before. In 6 hours, I was supposed to be at the airport with my daughter, heading to Europe. Paris first, then Rome. A trip I had planned for months. A trip I paid for in full. I glanced at my phone, expecting a message about the ride to the airport or a reminder about seat numbers. Instead, I read, "You are not coming with us. My husband thinks it's better if this vacation stays family only." I read it again, slowly, carefully, as if reading it wrong might make it hurt less. Family only. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the sock still hanging uselessly from my fingers. My heart didn't race. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the phone. What I felt was worse. A hollow click inside my chest, like something locking into place. I typed one word back. "Okay." That was it. No argument, no questions, no begging. I had spent my life teaching my daughter that dignity mattered. I wasn't about to abandon that lesson now. I closed the suitcase. Each latch snapped shut with a final sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet room. I moved slowly, deliberately, folded the clothes back into the closet, put the passport in the drawer, tickets into the shredder. The whir of the blades felt strangely calming. Later that night, I scrolled through Facebook, not because I wanted to, but because silence can be unbearable when it stretches too long. That's when I saw the photos. My daughter, her husband, and his parents. All four of them smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. The caption read, "So grateful for family time in the City of Light." Family time. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I counted the faces twice, just to be sure. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes your body reacts before your pride can stop it. I wasn't family. I was the funding. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every sacrifice I'd made, every check I'd written, every time I'd told myself, this is what fathers do. By morning, my phone buzzed again. A bank notification, a restaurant charge. Paris. That was when something inside me finally went quiet. They didn't want me on their vacation, but they were perfectly happy spending my money while I sat alone in the house I'd paid off 30 years ago. I stared at the notification for a long time. Then I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a happy one. The kind of smile you get when you finally understand the rules of the game and realize you've been playing it wrong. I didn't become generous overnight. It happened slowly, over decades, disguised as responsibility. I raised my daughter believing that if I worked harder, worried less about myself, and put her first, everything would turn out right. That was the deal I made with life when her mother left, and it became just the two of us. I was 38 years old when I started working 12-hour days. Not because I loved my job, but because overtime paid more, and more meant security. I told myself sleep was optional. Childhood wasn't. By the time Lindsay finished high school, I had already paid for tutors, extracurricular programs, and SAT prep courses totaling just over $18,000. I never complained. I never kept score. When she got into college, I remember hugging her and saying, "Don't worry about money. Focus on your future." That promise cost me $146,000 in tuition, housing, books, and fees over 4 years. I paid every semester on time. Never once asked for repayment. Never once reminded her what it cost. When she graduated, she hugged me and cried, telling her friends, "My dad sacrificed everything for me." I believed that meant something. Then came the wedding. She wanted something elegant, classy, nothing over the top, she said. That turned into a venue deposit of $22,000, catering costs just under $19,000, flowers, photography, music, attire, and unexpected must-haves that pushed the final number past $31,000. I paid it all. When she thanked me, it felt genuine. When her husband shook my hand and said, "We appreciate everything you've done," I believed him. That was my mistake. 2 years later, they wanted a house. The bank wouldn't approve them a loan. Too much debt, too little stability. Her husband's income fluctuated, and Lindsay was between jobs. I stepped in. $80,000 down payment, my name on the deed, my credit on the line. "Just until we get settled," she said. "Well, transfer everything soon," he said. They never did. When things got tight, I covered car payments. When credit cards ran high, I paid them down. When emergencies came up, my phone rang, and I answered every time. I told myself this was temporary, that young families struggle, that this was what fathers were for. I didn't notice when gratitude turned into expectation. I didn't notice when conversations only started with, "Dad, we need." I didn't notice when invitations stopped coming unless money was involved. The European trip was my idea. I thought it would be good for us. Time together, memories, something real, not just transfers and transactions. I booked the flights, chose the hotels, paid for everything up front. Total cost, $14,600. I thought I was buying connection. What I was really doing was reinforcing a pattern. Every sacrifice I made was logged somewhere in their minds as entitlement. Every time I stepped in, I stepped further out of their respect. Looking back, the signs were obvious. I just wasn't ready to see them. Betrayal rarely announces itself all at once. It creeps in quietly, wearing the mask of small changes you're told not to take personally. At first, it was nothing I could point to, just a feeling that something had shifted. Sunday dinners used to be routine, nothing fancy. Roast chicken, vegetables, a bottle of decent wine. Conversations about work, plans, ordinary life. Then Sundays became busy. Then dinners were rescheduled. Then forgotten altogether. I told myself young couples needed space. Phone calls grew shorter. Texts replaced conversations. When I did get a call, it was usually preceded by silence, followed by a request. "Dad, can you help us just this once?" That phrase showed up more often than I was comfortable admitting. Her husband was polite in public, correct, always smiling. But there was a distance in him, something cold behind the eyes. He rarely looked at me directly. When he did, it felt like he was measuring something and finding it lacking. Once, during a family dinner, he laughed and said, "You're old school, aren't you?" Not as a compliment. I laughed along. That's what I did. I always laugh things off. Then came the comments. "You worry too much. You should relax more. You don't need to be involved in everything." Involved. That word stung, though I didn't say it out loud. I was only involved when money was needed. When decisions had already been made, my involvement suddenly became inconvenient. Birthdays became afterthoughts. Invitations came late, if at all. I learned about milestones through social media instead of phone calls. Promotions, trips, purchases I quietly helped fund. Once I showed up early to their house to drop off something I'd paid for. Her husband opened the door, surprised, and hesitated before letting me in. "We didn't know you were coming," he said. I stopped announcing visits after that. The subtle decay wasn't loud. It was surgical. Each moment small enough to ignore, but together they carved something essential away. I started feeling like a guest in my daughter's life, a guest who paid for the privilege of being tolerated. Still, I defended them. They're busy. They're under pressure. They don't mean it that way. That's what people say when they're afraid to confront the truth. I noticed how her tone changed when she spoke to me on speakerphone with her husband nearby. Less warmth, more edge, as if affection embarrassed her. Then there were the jokes. "Oh, Dad, you wouldn't understand. Dad, you're being dramatic. You're overthinking it." Overthinking became their way of dismissing anything that made them uncomfortable. The worst part wasn't the words. It was the way I started doubting myself. Maybe I was too present. Maybe I was too available. Maybe wanting to be included was asking for too much. That kind of thinking creeps in when you've spent years giving without boundaries. The first time I realized something was truly wrong was the day I overheard her say to someone else, "He means well, but he's a lot. A lot." I stood in the hallway pretending not to hear, my hand resting on the wall to steady myself. In that moment, I felt something fracture quietly inside my chest. I had become a burden. Not because I demanded anything, not because I crossed lines, but because I no longer fit the image they wanted to project. And still, I did nothing. Because fathers endure. Because love excuses. Because denial is easier than grief. I didn't know then that these small cuts were preparing me for something far worse. But looking back, this was where the betrayal truly began. Not with cruelty, with indifference. The moment everything collapsed didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with a photograph. I was sitting alone in my living room that evening, the suitcase still untouched by the bedroom door, when I opened Facebook out of habit. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed noise, something to fill the space where anticipation used to be. That's when I saw it. My daughter, her husband, his parents, all four of them standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, arms close, glasses raised, smiling like people who believed they deserved every good thing life had handed them. The caption read, "So grateful for family time in the city of light." Family time. I stared at that word longer than I stared at the faces. Family. I refreshed the page. Another photo appeared. A restaurant table, wine glasses, candlelight. A view I recognized immediately from the itinerary I had planned. The walking route. The dinner reservation. My plan, executed without me. I felt something drain out of me then. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice light and distracted. I could hear street noise behind her. Laughter. A life continuing without me. "Hi, Dad." I didn't waste time. I saw the photos. There was a pause. Not surprise, not confusion, just silence. "You said it was family only," I continued. "Explain to me how his parents qualify and I don't." She exhaled sharply, already annoyed. "Dad, Todd didn't want the trip ruined." The word hit me harder than anything else she could have said. "Ruined?" I asked. "You can be. A lot," she said. "You worry too much. You hover. This was supposed to be relaxing." Relaxing. I paid for the tickets. I paid for the hotels. I paid for the meals they were posting pictures of. But my presence was the problem? "I'm your father," I said quietly. "And Todd is my husband," she replied. "He comes first now." There it was. Not love, not gratitude, hierarchy. In the background, I heard her husband laugh, a careless sound, the sound of someone who had already decided I didn't matter. "You didn't even tell me," I said. "I knew you'd overreact," she answered. "See? This is what I mean. Overreact." I sat there listening to my own daughter explain why excluding me was reasonable, why my feelings were inconvenient, why my role had expired the moment it stopped being useful. "You're too needy," she said finally. Needy? I looked around the room. The house I paid off. The furniture I maintained. The life I built without anyone else's help. Needy. "I understand," I said. "Good," she replied, relieved. "Well, talk when we get back." I ended the call without saying goodbye. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A banking alert. A restaurant charge in Paris. On my card. They had cut me out of their family, but not out of their wallet. I stared at the notification until it stopped feeling real, until it became a number, a transaction, evidence. That was the moment the last illusion died. Not when she excluded me, not when she insulted me, but when she proved, without hesitation, that my only remaining value to her was financial. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I sat perfectly still and let something inside me go cold, because betrayal hurts. But clarity? Clarity changes everything. I didn't rush into action that night. That surprised even me. Old habits die hard. I had spent a lifetime pausing before making decisions, weighing consequences, choosing stability over impulse. So instead of reacting, I sat in my home office with the lights off, the glow of my phone illuminating the desk. Another transaction alert appeared. Paris. Clothing store. My card. They were shopping. While I sat alone in the house ID paid off decades ago, they were enjoying a vacation I had planned, funded, and been deliberately excluded from. That was the moment something shifted permanently. I opened my banking app, navigating to the section I rarely thought about anymore. Authorized users. Emergency access. The digital equivalent of trust. My daughter's name was there. I remembered the day I added her. She had just graduated. Credit was hard to build. I wanted to help. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary had turned into entitlement. My finger hovered over the screen. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaking. I felt clear. I revoked her access immediately. The confirmation message appeared, sterile and final. Authorized user removed. For the first time in years, I felt control return to my hands. But I knew this was only the beginning. Money had been the surface issue. The real problem ran deeper. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out the documents I hadn't looked at in months. Property records, insurance papers, old mortgage files. The kind of paperwork responsible men keep, even when others don't appreciate it. That's when I saw it. The deed. My name. Only my name. The house I had bought for them. The house they lived in. The house they referred to as ours. It was never legally theirs. I sat back in my chair, breathing slowly. Not relief, recognition. I hadn't been careless. I had been cautious. Somewhere along the way, my younger self had anticipated this exact scenario, even if my heart hadn't wanted to believe it was possible. I made one phone call that night. Marcus Chin. He had been my real estate agent for years, professional, discreet. He understood situations without needing explanations. "Marcus," I said when he answered, "I need to sell a property." There was a pause. "Which one?" "The Maple Street house." Another pause, longer this time. "That's your daughter's place." "Yes," I replied evenly. "It's also mine." He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer opinions. "When do you want it listed?" "As soon as possible." We set a meeting for the next morning. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, not because I felt vindicated, but because I finally stopped lying to myself. The next day I sat across from Marcus in his office, sunlight streaming through tall windows as he reviewed the documents. "You're clear," he said. "Title is clean. You can sell without issue." "Good. The market is strong," he continued. "If you price it to move, well, have offers fast. Price it to move." That was the moment I chose consequences over conversation. On my way home, my phone rang. International number. I let it ring. Then again. And again. Eventually, I answered. "What did you do to the card?" my daughter demanded, skipping any greeting. "I removed your access. You embarrassed me in front of Todd's parents." I imagined the scene, the declined transaction, the confusion, the sudden exposure. "That must have been uncomfortable," I said calmly. "You can't do this to us," she snapped. "We're family." Family. The word sounded different now. "You decided I wasn't," I replied. "I'm just respecting that boundary." There was shouting after that. Threats, accusations, words designed to regain control. I listened quietly. Then I ended the call. No allies had come to her rescue this time, because the truth was simple. I didn't need an army. I didn't need revenge. I had the law. I had patience. And for the first time, I had clarity. And clarity, I was learning, was the most powerful ally of all. I didn't announce anything. That was the most important part. While they were posting photos of wine glasses and sunsets, I moved quietly. No social media, no warnings, no dramatic speeches, just preparation, the kind that actually changes outcomes. The morning after I met with Marcus, I drove to the Maple Street house while they were still overseas. I parked down the block, not out of fear, but out of habit. Old instincts from a lifetime of handling things carefully. The house looked peaceful, curtains drawn, no cars in the driveway, a place waiting to be used by people who didn't yet know their time there was already over. I unlocked the door with my spare key. Inside, everything was exactly how they'd left it. Half-empty coffee mugs, shoes kicked off by the entryway, a stack of unopened mail on the counter. Evidence of comfort, of assumption. They had never once asked whose name was on the deed. I walked through each room slowly, not sentimental, just observant. The furniture, ID paid for. The electronics, ID helped finance. The home office setup bought during one of his rough months. I wasn't angry. I was methodical. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a storage facility, climate-controlled, secure, paid in advance. The second was to a moving company, family-owned, reputable, no questions beyond logistics. The third was to my attorney. "Everything is legal," he confirmed after reviewing the documents again. "You're the sole owner. You're allowed to sell. You're allowed to remove property you own from a property you own." "Good," I said. "Then we proceed." 2 days later, while they were still in Europe, the movers arrived. I supervised the entire process. Boxes were labeled, furniture wrapped, personal items handled carefully. Not out of kindness to them, but because I wasn't about to give anyone ammunition to call me careless or cruel. By noon, the house was empty. Echoes replaced entitlement. I locked the door and handed the keys back to Marcus. Later that day, the listing went live that evening. It sold in under 48 hours. Cash offer, no contingencies. While they were arguing over restaurant bills overseas, the house they thought was theirs became someone else's future. My phone rang non-stop during that time. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, swinging wildly between anger and desperation. I didn't respond. Silence isn't passive when it's intentional. It's pressure. Eventually, the messages changed. Threats. Well, take legal action. You can't do this. You'll regret this. I saved every message. Then I blocked the numbers. The trap wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was built on paperwork, patience, and the quiet confidence of someone who finally understood leverage. By the time they boarded their return flight, everything was already finished. They just didn't know it yet. And that was the most satisfying part of all. They thought the worst was over. That was their biggest mistake. The first call came while they were still overseas, an international number lighting up my phone late at night. I didn't answer. I already knew what it would be. The second call came an hour later, then a text. "What is going on with the house?" I smiled when I read that. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed exactly what I expected. They had sensed something shifting beneath their feet, but they still believed they were in control. By the time their flight landed back home, the tone had changed completely. My daughter called first. Her voice was tight, rehearsed, trying to sound calm. "Dad, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That word again. Their favorite shield. "I don't think so," I replied evenly. "We just got a notification about the utilities," she continued, ignoring me. "They're saying the account is being transferred. Did you change something?" "I finalized something," I said. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. I could picture her gripping the phone, her husband hovering nearby, listening. "You had no right," her husband's voice cut in suddenly. "That's our home." "No," I said calmly. "It was a property I allowed you to live in." The silence that followed was thick. Then came the anger. "You're doing this because of a vacation?" he snapped. "That's pathetic." Pathetic. Interesting how that word resurfaced when control slipped away. "This has nothing to do with the vacation," I replied. "It has everything to do with respect." They laughed. Actually laughed. "You think you're teaching us a lesson?" he scoffed. "Well, fix this when we get back. Lawyers exist." That was the hubris, the unshakable belief that consequences were for other people. My daughter took the phone back. "Dad, you're being dramatic. You're emotional. Let's talk when we're face to face."
Emotional? I hadn't raised my voice once. They still believed I was bluffing, that I would fold the moment they applied pressure, that I needed them more than they needed me. That belief followed them all the way back home. I watched from my car as their taxi pulled into the Maple Street driveway. Confusion hit first, then panic, then disbelief. Strangers were inside the house. Boxes, furniture, laughter, life moving forward without them. I stepped out of the car slowly, calmly, like a man arriving exactly where he intended to be. "What is this?" my daughter shouted the moment she saw me. "Why are people in our house?" "Our?" I repeated. Her husband pushed past her, storming toward the front door. "You need to get out," he shouted at the new owners. The look on his face when they showed him the deed was something I'll never forget. Shock doesn't scream, it drains. My daughter turned to me, eyes wild.
"Fix this, now." That was the last command she ever gave me. "The house was sold," I said, "legally, cleanly. You can't do this to family," her husband yelled. Family. The word finally sounded hollow coming from his mouth. "You decided I wasn't family," I said quietly. "I just adjusted accordingly." They threatened lawsuits, police, public humiliation. I stood there and listened. Then I handed them the storage unit information and walked away. Behind me, entitlement collapsed in real time. They had spent years mistaking patience for weakness. Now they were learning the cost of that mistake. The moment always comes, the one where denial runs out of places to hide. They stood on the sidewalk with their suitcases still dusty from travel, staring at a house that no longer belonged to them. The locks had been changed. The curtains were different. Laughter echoed from inside. A new family already settling in. My daughter looked at me as if I had personally rearranged the laws of the universe. "This isn't real," she whispered. "This can't be real." Her husband wasn't whispering. "This is theft," he shouted. "You stole our house." I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my jacket pocket and handed him the envelope I had prepared days earlier. Inside were copies: the deed, the sales contract, the closing confirmation. Every document clean, legal, and final. He flipped through them frantically, his hands shaking now. This was supposed to be temporary," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "You were supposed to transfer it." I met his eyes for the first time in days. "You were supposed to treat me like family," I said. "We all make assumptions." My daughter sank onto the curb, her suitcase tipping over beside her. The reality hit her harder than it hit him. He had always believed someone else would fix things. She had believed I always would. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked, her voice small. I handed her the second envelope. "Your belongings are in storage, climate-controlled, paid for 1 month." Her hands trembled as she opened it. "You packed up our life," she said. "No," I corrected. "I reclaimed mine." That's when the threats started. "You'll hear from our lawyer. We'll take you to court. You'll regret this." I listened quietly, the way I always had. Then I said something I'd never said before. "With what money?" Silence. The realization spread slowly across their faces. Credit cards frozen, accounts inaccessible, no house to leverage, no safety net left to exploit. For the first time, they were standing exactly where they had placed me, outside. I turned toward the house where the new owners were watching nervously through the window. "Go inside," I told them. "This is handled." They nodded and disappeared back into their new life. I walked back to my car without looking behind me. Behind me, entitlement collapsed. In front of me, consequence finally arrived. The hammer hadn't just fallen. It had landed exactly where it was meant to. They didn't give up immediately. People who feel entitled never do. 3 days after they lost the house, the first legal letter arrived. Thick envelope, aggressive language, threats dressed up as confidence. Their lawyer accused me of financial coercion, emotional abuse, unlawful eviction. I read it once, then I smiled. Because every accusation assumed something that was no longer true. That I was afraid, that I would fold, that I needed their approval. I forwarded the letter to my attorney without comment. He called me an hour later. "This is noise," he said. "They have no case. Title was clean. Sale was legal. You even stored their belongings responsibly. Frankly, the judge won't appreciate the theatrics." Good. A week later, we were in court. They sat on one side of the room, stiff and angry. My daughter wouldn't look at me. Her husband stared as if intimidation alone could bend reality. The judge listened patiently, then asked one question. Whose name was on the deed? My client's, my attorney answered calmly. The courtroom fell quiet. Every argument they had collapsed in that single moment. No shared ownership, no agreement in writing, no transfer, no entitlement recognized by law. The ruling was swift. Case dismissed. All legal fees awarded to me. I didn't react. I didn't celebrate. I simply nodded, thanked my attorney, and stood up. My daughter finally looked at me then, not with anger, with something worse. Regret. Outside the courthouse, she tried one last time. "Dad, please." I stopped walking, but didn't turn around. "This didn't have to happen," she said. "You went too far." I finally faced her. "No," I replied evenly. "I went exactly far enough." Her husband stepped in again, voice sharp with desperation now. "You ruined our lives." I looked at him calmly. "No," I said. "I stopped funding yours." There was nothing left to say. They faded from my life after that. Not dramatically, not tragically, just quietly, the way relationships end when there's nothing left to take. Months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were renting a small apartment, that money was tight, that resentment filled the space where gratitude should have been. They blamed me. Of course they did. But karma doesn't need permission. It only needs time. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, in moments so ordinary they would have been easy to miss if I hadn't finally learned how to pay attention. The house felt different after everything ended. Not emptier, lighter, like a place that no longer carried expectations it never agreed to hold. Mornings became slower. Coffee tasted better when I wasn't waiting for my phone to ring with another request disguised as concern. A few weeks later, I adopted a dog. Max was 3 years old, a golden retriever whose family had moved overseas and decided he was inconvenient to take along. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge. He just sat beside me like he understood exactly what it meant to be left behind and still choose loyalty. We healed together. With time on my hands and clarity in my mind, I started doing things I had postponed for years. I bought a travel trailer. Not extravagant, practical, paid in full, no debt, no explanations required. I drove west with Max riding shotgun, his head out the window like every mile was a victory. National parks, small towns, quiet diners where no one knew my story and no one needed to. For the first time in decades, my life belonged to me. I thought about my daughter sometimes, not with anger, not even with sadness anymore, just acceptance. I had loved her deeply. I had given generously. But love without boundaries had taught her the wrong lesson, and I refused to pass that lesson on. The legacy I chose wasn't money. It was consequence. It was the understanding that kindness must be paired with limits, that respect is mutual or it isn't real, that being a father doesn't mean being disposable. If there's one truth I carry forward, it's this. Kindness without boundaries is weakness, not because kindness is wrong, but because boundaries teach people how to treat you. I finally taught that lesson, and in doing so, I reclaimed my peace.